And now let's talk about India. New Delhi is working on a bold plan, one that could supercharge India's Act East policy. So what's the idea? India wants to supply electricity to Southeast Asia. The plan is still in the early stages. The goal is to trade power. And how will this work? India will supply electricity. The region will be connected with power grids. Power lines will be built both on land and under the sea. There will be two hubs for distribution, Myanmar and Thailand. The power lines and grid linkages will take 4 years to complete. The talks have begun. Reports say India has held discussions at G20 meetings. Why bring this up at G20? Because it is the ideal forum to seek funding and investment for this. And which countries has India spoken to so far? Reports say discussions have happened with Singapore, Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia and Thailand. Like I said before, the exact plan is yet to be firmed up. These are still early days, but the idea isn't a far-fetched one. India already supplies electricity to some neighbours like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and Myanmar. But this supply is relatively small. The aim is to expand this to cover the entire Southeast Asia region. Will this idea find takers though? New Delhi is said to be hopeful. The region needs a reliable partner. Earlier, ASEAN nations had mooted a different idea. ASEAN, as you would know, is a regional grouping. 10 Southeast Asian countries are members. Now, they have been discussing a regional power grid, but the idea never really took off. Progress has been limited to just bilateral agreements. There is no regional power grid, no framework to supply to the region as a whole. And why is that? Because these projects are difficult to execute. Setting up grids and power lines is an expensive affair, plus there are transmission costs. I'm talking about the cost of sending power from one place to another. It can be a significant financial burden. So you need a partner with some heft to see this through. And India could be that partner. The answer to Southeast Asia's power woes. But should India go down this route? Should it focus on supplying power overseas when it faces shortages at home? This year, demand for power has shot up in India, and so have shortages. Last month, in the month of June, the average daily shortage was more than 4 gigawatts. For context, in 2022, this number was around 1.5 gigawatts. So the shortages have more than doubled. And 2022 was particularly bad. There was stress on India's power grids. During the months of April and May, India experienced its worst outages in more than 6 years. And remember, India is a developing country, so its power needs will only grow every year. How then will India strike a balance between meeting domestic demand and supplying electricity overseas? Well, there is a plan, we are told. India plans to boost production to increase the supply from renewables and big hydropower stations. Right now, India gets 177 gigawatts worth of power from these sources. By 2030, this is expected to increase to 500 gigawatts. Plus more sources are being added. For example, India is engaged in talks with the UAE. There is a proposal on renewable energy. The plan is to connect the UAE's power grid with India's. If that happens, India and the UAE will be able to exchange power. And how does that work? Through undersea cables. Similar discussions are going on with Saudi Arabia too. Perhaps that's why India feels confident about expanding its supply to Southeast Asia. And of course, it makes diplomatic sense. Such a project, it makes strategic sense also. Such a project will establish India as a key regional player, a major hub for electricity. It will create interdependencies. It will deepen India's ties with Southeast Asia. It is also an effective strategy to counter China. Beijing has made deep inroads in the region. If India can increase its presence, it will keep the dragon in check. Our lead story tonight is about baijus, one of India's most celebrated unicorns. Today, it is a startup engulfed in a crisis. Baijus is huge in education. It's a household name in India. The company became so big that they signed Messi last year. That's right, the footballer Lionel Messi. He's a global ambassador of baijus. He was hired last year. You may already know this. But here's what you may not know. Right before baijus announced the Messi deal, they sacked some 2,500 employees. The company was worried about its budget. It wanted to cut costs. So they let go of 2,500 employees, and just days after handing the pink slips, as if to rub salt in the wounds, baijus announced the Messi deal. This happened at a time when investors were building pressure on the company. The company was losing money. It had reported a revenue loss of more than $54 million. There were calls to slash cost. And how did Baijus respond? By spending more money. They splurged on ad films with Messi. It was a tone-deaf move. And all these months later, it seems like Baijus still hasn't got its act together. Recently, a video went viral, apparently featuring a Baijus employee. She was recorded shouting at her seniors. Watch this.
He's not a president, he's not a vice president. Sir, we came from JE campaign, from K to a segment, right? हमें यहाँ पे word मिला कि हम यहाँ पे काम करेंगे तो हमें survive करने का मौका मिलेगा. But we are from starting हम नहीं काम करना चाहते थे. हम बोले कि हमसे काम नहीं होगा यहाँ. But still we are not getting any support. हमें अमितेश सर से community support मिला. Yes.
Want to have a conversation? Come.
No sir.
Please.
I will not come in cabin. I will come confront in here itself. मुझे यहाँ पे.
What was she complaining about? Lack of incentives and support and a toxic work culture. The Messi affair sums up what's wrong with Baijus and perhaps with a lot of other Indian startups. You see, there was a time when they were flush with cash, valuations were skyrocketing, raising money was easy, so the startups spent beyond their means. And they did so without showing any real profits. Now they're all getting a reality check. And this is what our lead story is about tonight. We'll start with Baijus. It is in deep trouble. Our viewers in India may have heard about it. If you haven't, here's a quick primer. Starting with Baijus. What is Baijus? It's a household name in online education, or what they call ed tech, education technology. At one point, it was called the world's largest ed tech company. At its peak, it had some 100 million students. But today, Baijus seems to be struggling to survive. It's been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Look at the latest one. There are allegations of foreign exchange violations. Baijus is being probed for this. In the month of April, the company was raided. Laptops were seized from the Baijus office in Bengaluru. And where was their chief executive? His name is Baiju Ravindran. Reports say he was sitting in Dubai, trying to save a fundraising deal. $1 billion were on the line, but the investors were nervous. Baiju Ravindran tried to assure them. He's said to have broken down during the call. The assurances were not working, it seems. You see, Baijus faces a lot of legal trouble as well, not just in India, but overseas too. Lawsuits have been filed in America. There is a fight going on between Baijus and its American creditors. The creditors say the company is hiding cash. How much? At least $500 million. The creditors also say that Baijus defaulted on a loan, but they had the money to pay. And what is Baijus' defense? It says the allegations are incorrect. So the court battle continues, but there is more to it than bad loans. This year, the company's auditor, Deloitte, also quit. Why did they resign? Deloitte was concerned about Baijus' financials. It had asked for some statements, but it was not given those statements. The crisis snowballed. Then 3 independent directors stepped down. The company said this was a planned transition, but last month another director quit. His name is Russell Driesenstock. He represents Process Envy, one of the early investors in Baijus. This week they spoke out. Why did they give up the board seat? Listen to their response. I'm quoting, "Executive leadership at Baijus regularly disregarded advice and recommendations relating to strategic, operational, legal, and corporate governance matters." So they've clearly lost trust. And the impact is showing on Baijus' financial health. Today, it is valued at more than $5 billion, and $5 billion may sound like a lot of money. But last year, Baijus was worth a whopping $22 billion. So this is a drop from $22 billion to $5. It's a loss of more than 70%. Today, Baijus is just a shadow of what it once was. Fresh layoffs have been ordered. Reports say anywhere between 500 and 1,000 employees have been let go of. A few days ago, Baijus gave up its largest office space in Bengaluru. So there's clearly an effort to slash cost. And that's the story of most startups. 2022 was a turbulent year for them. I have some data. Last year, more than 2,400 startups shut shop in India, 2,400 companies. And some 25,000 workers lost their job. This year could be worse. We are still in the month of July, and close to 11,000 startup employees have already been laid off. What do you think is the reason behind this? The money has dried up. Startups are not getting cash. There is a funding squeeze. In the first quarter of 2023, startups in India raised just $2 billion. Funding has dropped by 75% from last year. And this lack of money is exposing the weaknesses in their business models. Because investors now want to see profitability. They're no longer relying on just valuations. They want to see sound balance sheets. So startups are in a rush to fix their books. They want to show how they can manage expenses. The quickest way to do that is to slash jobs, to fire employees. But is that the right way? Is that the best way? Indian startups were once hailed for their innovation. They were a success story. Today, they've become a case study for management students, a lesson on how organizations should not be run. Baijus was once a poster child of Indian startups. Today, it's a cautionary tale. In the summer of 1999, India and Pakistan fought their last war, the Kargil War. Pakistan tried to capture Indian military posts. New Delhi hit back, taking control of all the territories. The war went on for 2 months. In the end, India emerged victorious, sending a message to the entire world, a message on how India could defend its borders. 24 years later, as India marks Kargil Vijay Divas, we look at how the war changed India and its military, and what India-Pakistan ties look like 2 decades after the war.
The Kargil War had a lot of firsts and lasts. It was the first war to be fought in the era of satellite TV channels, so emotions were running high. It was also the last war that India and Pakistan fought, one that changed the way the Indian military functions. The war broke out in May 1999. Pakistan made a surprise move. It infiltrated Indian-controlled positions along the LOC, that's the line of control. So Pakistan captured strategic heights in the Kargil, a move that caught India off guard. Pakistan had just conducted its nuclear tests a year before, so they thought India would be scared. Its response would be muted, but they were wrong. What followed was a war that went on for 2 months. In the end, India emerged victorious. We never started the war, but we did end it with a resounding message that India would do anything to defend its borders. 24 years later, the Kargil War serves as a reminder of how far India has come, both militarily and diplomatically. In 1999, the Indian Army suffered at the hands of Pakistani artillery at Kargil. India wanted GPS data of the region, but the US, who controlled GPS then, refused. This later turned into one of India's mega projects, developing its own satellite navigation system. It's called the Navik. It provides India with real-time positioning and timing services. The war forced India to modernize its military infrastructure, to look within. India ramped up border infrastructure, focused on military enhancement, and pushed for more made-in-India defense equipment. The idea was to become self-reliant, to never depend on anyone again. Kargil was the last war India fought with Pakistan. So how have things changed 24 years on? The two countries are still neighbors. No one can change the geography. But are India and Pakistan better neighbors? The two continue to clash over Kashmir. In 2019, relations dipped to an all-time low. A terrorist attack in Pulwama killed 40. India responded with airstrikes in Pakistan's Balakot. Things looked tense. There were murmurs of war. But it never came down to that. In 2022, however, there was some sort of a silver lining. Pakistan was dealing with devastating floods. India offered condolences. This year, Pakistan's foreign minister visited Goa. He was here for an SCO meet. In October, India will host the Pakistan cricket team for the ICC World Cup. The match will take place in Ahmedabad. So where do relations stand right now? India wants better relations with Pakistan, but for that it must keep terrorism in check. Pakistan, on the other hand, must deal with its internal politics first. Could the two neighbours have better relations? We won't hold our breath for that.
And some cricket news now. India's women's team captain Harmanpreet Kaur is in the spotlight. I'm afraid not for the right reasons. Her actions in Bangladesh have triggered an online debate. She's also been suspended by the ICC, that's the International Cricket Council. Harmanpreet will now miss 2 international matches plus a 50% match fee fine. But what exactly did she do? Let me tell you the backstory. Team India had travelled to Bangladesh for a series. We played 3 one-day internationals. Bangladesh won the first, India won the second, and the third was tied. But Harmanpreet was not happy. India was on course to win the third match, but towards the end, we lost a cluster of wickets. And one of those wickets was Harmanpreet. She was given leg before wicket, LBW, by the umpire. Harmanpreet disagreed with that decision. She smashed the stumps in disgust. That was strike 1. Strike 2 came during the post-match presentation. Harmanpreet called the standard of umpiring pathetic. She also passed a sarcastic jibe while receiving the trophy. Harmanpreet said, "The umpires tied the match for you, so call them for the photo as well." No point arguing about it. It was a low blow, what she said and what she did. But the internet is divided. One side is supporting Harmanpreet's actions. They say it's all about passion and aggression. The other side disagrees. They say it sends a bad message to viewers, especially to young kids. Women's cricket is making giant strides right now. It's an inspiration for young girls and boys around the world. Would you want them to see such behavior? I'm guessing not. At the same time, it's hard to ignore the double standards here. Commentators have different yardsticks for men and women. Male athletes are expected to be aggressive, and female athletes, well, not so much. When they display emotions or aggression, it's frowned upon. Serena Williams experienced it multiple times. She's been called intimidating and manly. She's also been compared to animals. Same with Martina Navratilova, another tennis icon. Look at how this website described her. A gal with manly arms. And it's not just about aggression. Any emotion displayed by female athletes is put under a microscope. Meet Gabby Douglas. She's a gymnast from the United States. Guess what she was criticized for? Not cheering hard enough for her teammates. Another example is Lisa Leslie. She used to play in the women's NBA. Commentators found her, quote unquote, difficult. And why is that? Because apparently she was aloof and self-absorbed. Now compare this to how male athletes are treated. Their aggression is not criticized. In fact, it is celebrated. Take Virat Kohli, for example. In his early days, Kohli was famous for his on-field antics. He once showed a middle finger to the crowd in Australia. He has in fact abused multiple times on the field. But what does the media call him? The face of New India. Surely this is a double standard, and we are not defending what Harmanpreet Kaur did. She was captaining Team India. It's an honor that very few people get. She should have handled the situation better. Maybe waited until after the presentation, or used better words. At the same time, we must criticize this online hypocrisy. You can't have different standards for male and female athletes. What's wrong is wrong. Harmanpreet's predecessor summed it up best. Her name is Mithali Raj. She wrote an article about this entire incident. Listen to what she said. It's okay to be aggressive and show emotions to a point, but one shouldn't forget the game is above individuals. While Harman's anguish is understandable, her behavior shouldn't be condoned. You can't play sports without passion, maybe even aggression. But aggression doesn't mean insulting your opponents or lashing out at umpires. It can be controlled, directed, and effective. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a new international exhibition cum convention centre complex in New Delhi. He flew a drone with a banner that read Bharat Mandapam. In Australia, more than 50 pilot whales died after they were stranded on a remote beach. Experts say the pilot whales in fact form strong bonds. When one gets into difficulty and strands, the rest of them usually follow. And NASA has released an image of what is being called a cosmic necklace nebula. It was formed by sun-like stars. It's located some 15,000 light years away from our planet. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1945, the Potsdam Declaration was signed. Under this, the United States, Britain and China called for Japan's unconditional surrender in the Second World War. They said either comply or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan responded to this ultimatum with no comment. In August that year, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
In the historic conference room at Potsdam, allies have been fulfilled.